Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we are going week to week watching one of your latest TV, usually streaming obsessions. In this set of episodes, I have been breaking down this second season of The Pitt with my wife, who is a medical professional, and I've been getting to know her job and her experience up until this point in a new light just through these conversations, and I hope you are enjoying them as well. We have had some very complimentary responses, so I'm really glad that you guys are enjoying the expertise she brings to the conversation. But wait, there's more. We are also discussing industry week to week, the HBO Max series, and just had a recommendation for Darren last week to definitely catch up on the new Game of Thrones spin-off series, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which had a fantastic episode last week, the fourth of the season. And this is only 6 episodes. So if you've been waiting, I don't know, I'm going to wait for the end. Well, the end is nigh, folks. This very week will just be at the penultimate episode of the season, already renewed for a second season, already, or I should say, hugely successful, very popular series. Very low barrier of entry if you are just barely familiar with Game of Thrones, even if you've never seen any of it, but you just know the very bare outlines of this universe. You can fully appreciate this. And as a matter of fact, it can be an intro to the entire universe. It is a prequel to that series. So if you wanted to watch this and then start to sample that story, that series, the full series, it works that way too. You don't even need to watch anything to do with House of the Dragon. As a matter of fact, I have not disliked House of the Dragon, but honestly, you can basically just skip all of House of the Dragon. And I'm not sure that is necessarily a detrimental way to watch the overall Game of Thrones project. And ironically, because maybe they're trying to do too much there, in this series, they're doing much less, but it is so entertaining. And maybe it's just my style of what I prefer to watch. In the same way that when we were kids, we all played with our Star Wars toys and we invented all these stories, this sandbox of the universe, that this rich alien universe that's been created. You know what? More of that, folks. Let's explore the world that's been created, this very rich world, without having this mythology redefining film or series every single time. Let's just improvise within the universe that's pre-created. And that's exactly what this series provides. So Darren has been binging the show, and I presume we will be discussing it in that next conversation we have, also discussing the most recent episode of Industry, which of course, also if you're behind on that, big reveal last week as to how this financial scam is being pulled off. And I'll have a lot more context for, like real world context for what's being outlined there in this upcoming episode. Also, without any huge premieres recently, we've had some holes in the calendar. So I, along with the new contributor, Alan, have been rewatching Christopher Nolan's films in anticipation of this summer's Odyssey release. And we've covered the first 2 films so far in his filmography, Following and now Memento. And those episodes are on there. I had a lot to say about Memento. Our conversation went very long. And of course, perhaps as I mentioned in that very episode, I may not have as much to say about the rest of his filmography as I do in Memento, which is one of my favorite films of all times. And since wrapping up The Night Manager with Sona, haven't found anything that we've been watching together currently. We're behind on Hijack. I'm not sure if we are going to re-enter the fray with that show. But as soon as I find something that we can watch together, I'll definitely make an announcement here on the podcast for anyone who's been missing her feedback. She will absolutely be back for season 2 of Your Friends and Neighbors in April, but that's April. We have more than a month before the return of that series. So there's got to be something along the way that we can binge or watch together. So make sure you subscribe so you know when all those new episodes become available. And we love your feedback, by the way, so please do reach out to us. needsomeIntroduction@gmail.com, the most efficient way to get to us. Or update or post a comment on any of our episodes on Spotify or on YouTube. And if you'd like to support the show, if you like what you're hearing, just share us with one of your friends. Someone who might appreciate the conversation or is watching these shows with you as well. Okay, let's get into the conversation. We don't have time this week to discuss in detail Drops of God, but I do discuss it very briefly at the end of this conversation. And we will definitely break down the current week's episode and next week's episode of Drops of God as well. We are approaching the end of the season on that series as well. All right, thanks for listening. Have a happy Valentine's Day. Enjoy your long weekend if you happen to have one. I'll talk to you soon. All right, Kim. So this 6th episode now of The Pitt was probably, this directed by Noah Wyle, by the way, which you pointed out, his first I double checked this after you brought that up. His first episode directing, although he's a producer on the show, and I think he writes a little bit too. I think was very mundane by the standards of this show, has what's been in the past, even some of the episodes this season. But I think it was probably the best episode of the season so far.
I agree. There's a lot of camaraderie going on in that episode. You can see the staff bonding with each other. You often see them like putting their hands on each other's shoulders and trying to have sympathy for the situations that are going on and relieving each other after some trauma has happened. So it was like a good feel from that episode.
And that's, it's interesting because the show so many times is so overt in what it's doing. Like old school TV, it could be very not subtle at what it does, especially when it's trying to shoehorn in some issues about, you know, the Medicaid system or hospital management and how depersonalizing it can be, or AI. Very unsubtle. It's a critique of AI so far this year, although I feel like there might be other sides to that eventually. But then the reason I like the show so much is the subtle things it pulls off, like you mentioned, that is showing us just even Langdon and Robbie, for example, just how he looks at him for the first time in this whole entire season, sympathetically when they're commiserating on the Louie character over his body. But of course, it's like how everybody needs to, and that's like the overriding through line for the entire episode is the passing of Louie, which we saw the beginning of last week. And there was like basically nothing that could have been done to assist them any further. I mean, I guess you can add some context to that. But more importantly is the fact that you see how they're all bonding over this experience, except for Ogilvy, who's completely, of course, his first day on the job, so does not have that empathy for Louie. He croaked, and like just the things he says, like first of all, he says he croaked to Whitaker, who, you know, is much more emotionally vested in this whole relationship. And then later on, that he is like, oh, what a surprise. A chronic drinker had, you know, who's had liver failure. What a surprise. Like he rolls his eyes, which of course is the pragmatic answer. But these people have seen this guy so many times, and the weight of, you know, and kind of that symbolizes the weight that, or the emotional weight that comes with having this job and having to interact with these people over and over again, even people who seem like lost causes.
Yeah, you do develop a relationship with your frequent flyers, whether it's in the ER or in any other area of medicine. And often in the ER, there's not a lot of people you get to know over time because most people are in and out. But when I worked in the ER, there were certain people that would come in, specifically the drinkers, but none of them were as nice as Louie. They all just wanted to sober up and have a tuna fish sandwich.
Which is kind of like what we see Louie do as well. More the affection comes from these folks who have built a bond around him in a way. Although they've done a really lovely job, I think, in just these past few episodes of making Louie more than... That's kind of why I kind of suspected that he was going to die at some point anyway, is because they've humanized him so much. Up until now, he just is like that nice guy, like that probably everybody in your line of work probably has that experience of there's this guy who always rolls in, who was drunk or who has some kind of chronic condition, and you see them over and over again. But you're pretty dehumanized. Like you basically have just imposed a biography on them. And in this particular case, we explicitly see or discover things about Louie. And of course, like, you know, just to cut to the very end, and then we can circle back and fill in some of these other details. But that revelation at the end that, you know, basically what probably has driven him to this chronic drinking is this severe loss he had, which, you know, he was a productive member of society and had a wife and a child on the way, and how, you know, he's was derailed by this tragedy.
Yeah, Robbie points out at the end when they're having their meeting over the death of Louie that he was married and his wife was pregnant and they died in a car accident. So that gives you a little bit more context for Louie's life and perhaps why he turned to drinking as a crutch for his loss. Very sad.
Another thing that I think is throughout this entire episode, another theme is the invisible work, and maybe you can speak to this in a lot more detail, but the invisible work that nurses do. First of all, we see that Perlah is very upset about Louie dying, even more so than some of the doctors, it seems to be. And then, of course, the cleaning of the body by Dana, and then this new, who I can't remember her name, but the first day nurse who's here. I was about to say first year, but I'm like, this show is all taking place in one. So this is still her very first day, very eventful first day for this poor nurse, student nurse. And then also seeing just all the work that, you know, like, for example, the woman who's dying of cancer and this woman who's facilitating her death
The death doula.
doula. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the word I was looking for. I almost said Sherpa, not a death Sherpa. But again, like all this kind of invisible work. And so a couple of questions I have for you. First of all, is like what the nurses do, who are like the heroes here, overtly shouted out again. This Miley Cyrus looking, this young nurse who's rolled around. I don't know who she is, but apparently she just rolls into the room. She knows everything. And we even see Whitaker echoing what Robbie said last year. And again, Robbie nodding his head. Whitaker's been paying attention. That he's like, the nurses run the ER. We just try to keep out of their way. So anyway, if you want to add some context to all that.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. That's the first thing I was taught when I started working in the ER was just listen to the nurses, because the experienced nurses know how to work up every single problem. So take their advice and listen to them for sure, because they're the top of the heap for sure when it comes to patient care. And it was interesting to see the background after Louie dies of how they're like cleaning him up. And you don't think about those things. I never saw that happening, but that's all behind the scenes. So that was nice to bring that out, because the ER can't run without these nurses taking care of the details. So I liked that.
Yeah, I specifically wanted to bring up the cleaning of the body in that very regard. Because like for me, I literally wrote in my notes, like, I never thought about that. Like how, when the family goes to see the body or the person's in recovery. And that's the other thing I was thinking about. It's not just when somebody dies. It's like when I get, when I had my surgery or whatever. And then, when the family comes in to check on you afterwards, that it's like, you're all, someone is prepping you so that you look not traumatic when your family comes to hold your hand, right? And it's just like, this is all work. Like you said, even as a doctor, this is work that you walk into the room and the patient is prepped. And that was they're doing the staging, they're doing all the behind the scenes stuff like that. It's like going on to, I actually thought about the analogy of, putting on a play or something or making a movie where, the actors show up and they're the ones who are in front of the camera and the director's going to call the shots. But like, who built these sets that they're standing in front of? Like all that stuff just magically appeared. Someone built those walls and painted them and put the lights in the right places. And then you just walk up and do your job. But who's building all this stuff?
Yeah, in the setting of medicine, it's the nurses. They're building everything. It's like when we have a patient who's gotten out of surgery and goes to the ICU, there's a group of ICU nurses that just descend on the patient and get them situated in bed and get all their drips and wires organized and get their blankets organized and make them, put them together so that then the families can come visit. So the doctors and nurse practitioners and PAs are not doing those things. We deliver the patient and then walk away and then come back an hour later and everything's fixed.
And even even speaking of the nurse practitioner, I like the fact when they have to close that knee joint. I have a lot of questions about that case. Just out of it was just a way for the show to be like, I bet you didn't know that this is how they check that there's, you don't need to have surgery on a knee. So a lot of that is just kind of like showing off new medical techniques, some things that you haven't even seen, like this fluorescent liquid. But I like when they have to actually close the wound, that they asked the nurse practitioner to show the technique. So again, he's in triage every day. So any of these minor things, they're kind of like taking care of it before they get in front of the stage again, before the doctor has to come and look. So again, it's called this invisible work that's happening, that's keeping things operational.
Nurse practitioners and PAs are always in the area of the ER where the laceration repairs happen and some of the more considered minor treatment areas. So PAs have more experience closing lacerations than the attendings do. And they pointed that out when they had the NP show them how to put in a subcutaneous stitch in this big open knee laceration. So he was giving the new medical students and residents advice on how to close it, which was great. Although one problem, he did not tie his sutures tight enough. You could see there was a gap between the muscle. Nice try, though.
Well, they're not actual doctors. And who knows if this artificial leg they use could actually close that perfectly, although it looks very convincing. Obviously, everything in the show looks very convincing. But of course, like for anybody who hasn't listened to the show before, you are not a doctor. You actually are a PA. So you're kind of in between these two layers. So you are oftentimes doing this suturing after the big surgery has been done, correct?
Yeah, I mean, in the operating room, PAs generally will close the incisions when the doctors, especially in orthopedics. I used to do ortho. So the doctors would leave when the knee replacement's done, and then the PAs will do the closure.
So in that way, in this scenario, same thing, like the doctor in this case is probably not the best at doing the suturing, considering that the nurse, exactly what we see here, is probably doing it.
And sometimes you'll have patients complain that they're not seeing the doctor. Meanwhile, it's like, I can do this better than the doctor, but hold on, let me get you a doctor.
Before we move on to anything else, I wanted to touch on a few other things that you brought up already. First of all, this whole idea of frequent flyers, is that a terminology that you use regularly?
Oh, for sure.
And have you ever had like a personal relationship with a frequent flyer that for whatever reason, like they are now no longer having some condition, like they got healthier, so they're no longer seeing them anymore, or passed away? Have you ever had that kind of experience?
Definitely. I mean, in my line of work, we have patients who are chronically ill and have vascular problems. So they come back again and again with, complications. So I do develop a relationship with them. And I actually saw a patient yesterday that one of my surgeons has done multiple procedures to, and she's always in and out of the hospital. And when her daughter sees me walk in the room, she's like, "Oh, thank God it's you," because she knows that I know the story of the patient. And she actually said to me, she's like, "I've read your notes. I know you're paying attention." I was like, yes, you just validated me. Thank you.
And one more thing I wanted to bring up specifically on that is you mentioned how, you haven't even thought about somehow like the body's being cleaned and all that prep that happens, and how even you don't see it in your line of work. Another aspect of this that I found kind of shocking, because again, just questions I never ask myself because I don't have to, luckily. What's going to happen to his body if no one comes and claims it? Is that like, are the bodies disposed of at the hospital? And is there like does the hospital, do hospitals traditionally have their own burial grounds basically?
I actually don't know. I mean, if no one comes to see the patient after they've passed, they go to the morgue, and Dana points out that they'll just get cremated and go somewhere. I don't know. I've not actually looked into that.
Yeah, I know that in the olden days, there would be a cemetery behind the hospitals. Like this is like, old time movies and stuff. So that's probably where they dispose of the bodies. I don't know how that is in an urban area because of the density of real estate, and especially where you work too, because there's so much real estate around there too. I assume there isn't like a graveyard just for the hospital, but maybe they just have like a lot in a local cemetery.
It is possible. If the bodies get cremated and no one claims the remains, they have to go somewhere. So now I'm going to have to go call the morgue and find out.
See, I never even thought about that. I'm like, yes, these bodies have to go somewhere. Never thought of it. And one more thing to bring up here is this is an interesting, I don't know if it was in the script or if it was just in the direction itself, but I found it very interesting when everybody's having this emotional reaction to Louie dying. And I think it's Perlah who walks out of the door upset. And the camera, the focus pulls to that homeless man who's in the corner of the room. And you think about the fact that Louie has been mostly unhoused. Like he's basically been picked up off the street multiple times. That's how he ends up there in the first place. So maybe it's like, therefore, the grace of God go I, is this guy thinking? Or just obviously they're trying to make some connection between these two different people. Like maybe, we've just humanized Louie, and this guy who was just a stinky guy that got bathed earlier in the season will maybe discover that when he's medicated, he might have, he's not just some freak on the street.
Yeah, we haven't really gotten into any of that guy's backstory. They also showed him in the background when they're talking about the incarcerated patient who's malnourished. You see, a shot of the homeless guy, and Dr. Alashimi is trying to help this malnourished inmate, and Robbie's, brushing it off. Like, we don't have beds for this. There's PAs and nurse practitioners that can take care of him back in prison, but he's not eating well. He's not getting fed enough. And she's trying to help him. And then you see the homeless guy in the background. So it's like they are trying to think of the underserved and what they can do for them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the prisoner as well. Last week, I was like, oh, what are they trying to indicate with the prisoner? Is he going to try to bust out of there? Or at least here in this particular episode, speaking of the thematics of a specific, within the episode itself, there definitely seems to be that what they're talking about is, just like you mentioned, it is saying that there's humanity to these people who are forgotten, right? Whether it was Louie and how we didn't think about his humanity, whether it is this homeless man who, like, now that he's been cleaned up, looks completely different, unrecognizable from what he looked like before. And we'll probably discover more about his backstory, or this prisoner too, who like walks in there and everybody's handcuff him. He's dangerous. And then it turns out they grew up in the same neighborhood, as him and Dana grew up in the same neighborhood. And Jesse, the other nurse practitioner, says, "Oh, he's a good guy. You should talk to him." So they were commiserating in there as well. So once again, it's just like these people who are these monsters who probably made mistakes in their lives, obviously, but that we don't give them humanity. It's like if you just speak to them for 5 minutes, now all of a sudden they're trying to like rescue him. And that's an interesting point to bring up. Al-Hashimi wants to keep him there at the same time that she's complaining, like, we need to like turn over these beds more quickly. And Robbie's like, we need to get him out the door. And I think that's very interesting that like Al-Hashimi, and I guess that is like the tension in being a medical provider at all. Like you want to give each one of these patients the highest level of care, but then there's the reality of like, we only have so many beds.
Yeah, it's true. And Dana steps in with the prisoner and does something to his oxygen monitor to make him look like he had desaturated so that he couldn't leave, because now he's a guy from the neighborhood. So I'm going to try to help this guy and get him admitted to the hospital. And Robbie knows what she did, but he goes along with it.
That was a question I had for you. Can you guess what she's doing? Because he's like, you were in there. But more importantly, as they're walking out of the room, he's like, what did you do? What did you do? And she throws like a roll of tape to him. And I think that's a clue as to what she did. But I'm like, what could she have done? Did she like put did she tape up a fold in one of her tubes?
Maybe she just put tape on his finger so that the monitor couldn't read as well.
It could be something. But then somebody would see that, like as soon as they walk in there, and they'd be like, oh, it's because of this tape. And then I don't think that would have worked.
Not quite sure. Maybe she did some tape job to the connection of the monitor. I don't know.
I thought there was a clue in there that her throwing him the roll of tape gave a clue. But he didn't seem to. And then in my mind, in remembering it, I'm like, well, that definitely is what she's indicating there. But then in the very next scene, he's like, what did you do? Like it's not like she gave him enough information. And she's like, nothing. But, so denying it, obviously. Oh, speaking of Dana, she's very involved in this whole entire episode. And I guess one that's focusing on the nurses should actually focus on her extensively. I love that very early in the episode, there's that scene where that guy violently grabs the new nurse. And she like obviously has a very strong reaction to this, given what happened to her last season. And she like pulls the sign off the wall and she goes, $2,000 fine.
Don't touch us. Yeah, you got to protect your fellow nurses.
Yeah, and have we ever seen this actress before? I'm trying to think about this girl who showed up with this high ponytail, who I wrote down, she's like a mix of Elizabeth Olsen and Miley Cyrus. And I'm like, who is this girl who just shows up? And she's a nurse, right? And she like walks in and she goes, order this. Like she like, what all the medical students are trying to remember. And these, like, she's done this 100 times. So she knows exactly what to order. And they're like, how does she know that? And they're like, she just does. But I mean, do you think she's just, I mean, I assume she's going to become a bigger part of the plot, right? Because she just literally just waltzed in, unless I missed her at some earlier.
It could be that she just started her shift.
Oh.
And we haven't seen her before because she's showing up at whatever time it is, 11.
Oh, it's halfway. Yeah, we're 6 hours in, and this is supposed to be a 12-hour shift. And yeah, so I guess, I don't even know how shifts work. Are they, like, is everybody on your 12 shift, or is it, are there half shifts? Like, do you overlap?
Most of the time, you do a 12-hour shift in the ER, unless maybe they called her in to do like some overtime, and she just shows up to do whatever hours she needs to do.
Like per diem. Yeah. Yeah, and I was going to say, and I don't know how that works, obviously, but yeah, last year when that catastrophe happens at the end of the season, you see a dribble of doctors who were like just in the area start showing up. But then at the end of the season, the reason there's so many people around all of a sudden is because you have the previous shift and the entire second shift that showed up, right?
Yeah.
So that's the overlap in those last 3 hours of the show, I should say. But yeah, you make a good point. She could just be like, hey, I came in for overtime. Or someone called up and says, hey, we're short-staffed because it's a holiday and this stuff's happening. Are you available? And she's like, sure, I'll pick up a shift.
Yeah, when I used to work in the ER, we did a 7 to 7 shift. We did a 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. shift. And sometimes there's other overlap shifts where you have extra staff kind of when the volume starts to increase.
It just seems, I mean, like this is me as a layperson, it just seems that it's probably smarter to have some overlap in the shift because like to be like, hey, your shift ended. Now all these people show up and, hey, give me the debrief on everything that happened while I was out. Instead of being like, if people showed up a little bit early and there's overlap, they can kind of just follow you around and get the lay of the land pretty quickly, right? So
yeah,
work on that, people. We see a little bit more about this student, this law student, and his sister very concerned. What did you think about the language choices when the doctor was turning 21? I forget everybody's names today. Javadi, right? When Dr. Javadi goes, oh yeah, we haven't figured out exactly
what's wrong with him.
What's wrong with him? And that like triggers.
She's like, what do you mean what's wrong with him?
It just makes you wonder all the time, like even when I watch this show, and obviously when I hear you talk to your coworkers, the very technical language you use, and then it made me realize in that moment that's exactly like oh, we still don't have a diagnosis or something. You don't want to be like, we don't know what's wrong with your brother. What's wrong? What's wrong?
Yeah, those are kind of lay terms, like what's wrong with this person. And obviously the sister did not witness his psychotic episode, so she saw him sedated, and now he's back to his normal self. So
it's not his normal self though. She's in there, and when they take her out, she starts to panic because he's like, they don't want me to succeed. They've been talking to me. And she starts to freak out about that. Right, even then.
I don't mean he's normal, but now he can actually describe what has been happening, where he's had visual and auditory hallucinations. And obviously this is his first psychotic episode, and his sister cannot really wrap her mind around that.
Yeah, and they also don't know if there's any kind of history in the family, but I guess they need to talk to the sister too.
The parents are coming in.
Yeah, much more detailed. And another important character here is, of course, this cancer patient. And what is going on with this cancer patient and her husband, who seems to be doting? Do you think that he's actually abusive, or do you think that he's not? He's actually just trying to be there for her all the time, and that is suffocating in its own way? And of course, she wants to stay in the hospital. And that was another. So first of all, what do you think is going on with her? And second of all, I had this curiosity as to, can a patient just decide like, I am end of life and I just want to stay here while you guys manage my pain because I can't keep trying to put on a brave face anymore?
So to your first question, I think he is a doting husband. I don't think he's withdrawing pain meds or hurting her in any way. But there was a comment made about how like his light has gone out, meaning he's like doing so much work to take care of her and the house and the kids that he's like lost his sense of self, I suppose. And she realizes that's the case. And when she says like, why don't you go home? I'll wait for the ambulance. Don't worry about it, because he's always with her. So she's kind of giving him a break and giving him an out. And then my worry about this scenario is that she is not going to be able to leave the hospital. They've medicated her with pain medicine. They gave her some ketamine. And then because her morphine pump can't be delivered for hours, they decide to give her a humongous dose of long-acting morphine after she's already had other pain medicine. So I'm wondering if she's going to have a complication from being over-medicated in the next episode.
An intentional complication?
No, I'm just saying she's going to have like respiratory compromise or something will happen from being overdosed on pain medicine.
The reason I asked that question is because I do wonder if this is like some way where she's trying to get her husband away from her so that she can orchestrate.
Or she's sending her husband home so that she can die in peace, maybe at her own hands, or maybe it is related to the medication. It's possible.
Which is very sad, of course. This is another thing, again, that the show makes me think about, these things that probably we don't really want to think about. But again, this idea of end of life and like how hard this is. Like, you know, they seem to be the ideal situation. He's trying to be the doting husband. She's probably tired of trying to think about that. You know, you're literally on death's door, but you're trying to, in your mind, try to maximize the amount of time you have with your family, with your kids, when you probably just want this to all be over with. And, you know, and then like trying to be heroically like, I can go to the bathroom by myself. I can do that by myself. And it's just like, you are literally, this woman is literally months away from death. And she's still trying to pretend like everything's normal.
And yeah, she's realized she can't even dangle her leg. She can't even be transitioned from one stretcher to the next because she's absolutely miserable. So she's really, really debilitated. And I think she's like, this is now my time to go, because how can my husband take care of me like this? So I need to stay in the hospital, which she can do. She can choose inpatient hospice, and they can put her on the hospice floor. If
they have a hospice floor, or
I'm sure they do.
Another. That's interesting. And then maybe she wants to actually ask for hospice, but she can't do it in front of her husband.
Well, she's on home hospice. So
that's true.
That's what that death doula is. She's a hospice nurse.
Yeah.
But, you know, you can go home on hospice, or you can do inpatient hospice.
So maybe that's that. Maybe I didn't pick up on that when she's like, I don't want to leave. and everybody in the room looks at each other, I think they maybe know that means I don't want to leave, period.
This is my end right here.
Yeah. I got a couple questions on Santos. A rough week for Santos this week.
She's a mess, this one.
Sleep deprived, apparently hooking up with Garcia. Garcia blows her off.
My God, she is. I did not get that.
You missed that?
I completely missed that. Oh, I know she invited her over to her house, but that is not what I was thinking. Huh,
no, because she's like, come over to the house. Whitaker won't be there. And Robbie, after Garcia walks away, Robbie does like a double take.
Oh my God, I am such an idiot. I just thought they were friends.
You thought that she wanted to come over and play bingo or something?
Yes.
You want to play something else?
Oh God.
Maybe that's why she's so tired. But
from all the bingo playing?
All the bingo playing.
Oh no.
And but of course, the AI commentary where this is very funny, right?
I know. She's like so behind in her notes. And then she puts there's a couple errors in her past medical history and past surgical history. And then whoever that woman is, the surgeon that shows up, is like so mad that you didn't tell me she had her gallbladder out. She's like, she didn't have her gallbladder out. That I read it in the medical records.
Or that her urologist would check on her headache.
Yeah, not the neurologist, the urologist. I mean, we're really nitpicking here. If you call a surgical consult, they're not like pouring through the ER notes in the past medical history. They're just going to go see the patient.
The other thing, obviously, there should be some criticism of, being over-reliant on AI tools. I think a reality of we do need to be wary of this, especially at this moment where the tools are not perfect yet by any stretch of the imagination, although it does save. But I mean, Dr. Al makes a good point that, for example, dictation. I mean, even if you don't use AI, so many doctors use dictation software, and the dictation software is not 100% correct either in its translations.
And what also happens with electronic medical records is all of the things that you have come in with, your past medical history, surgical history, social history, home meds, those all just get pasted into the next note. So I don't know if that was Santos's error or if it was something was wrong in the initial inputting of the data, if you know what I mean.
Exactly. I'm sure there are plenty of flaws in all that is to say that I'm sure that the AI would make mistakes in this transcription, but there are so many other places where, for example, how many times, because I worked on an electronic medical record transition. This is years and years and years ago, like when Obama had, as part of Obamacare, there was all that funding for it. And the statistics during this presentation I made were that there were huge percentages, like sometimes 20% of all medical interactions that had negative outcomes were because the records just weren't digitized at all. So it's my point is that it's not like the system is perfect right now, people. So let's compare it to what's there now. Let's not compare it to perfect where no mistakes are made. Because right now, doctors are completely overworked. We are short-staffed. They are not updating their records. Electronic medical records are still not always used. There's still a lot of faxing going on. So, hey, people, it's not perfect. Calm down.
The faxing kills me. I still have to use a fax machine sometimes. It's absurd.
Put this all into a digital record so that you can fax it to me.
I had to request medical records from a hospital that is not in our hospital system and is not on Epic. So I literally had to fax a request written on a prescription pad so that they could then fax me results of a prior operation for which I never received anything from that hospital.
See, that's how it works, people. And then some of them less, dramatic elements here. Well, actually one very dramatic one, but just something that gets brought up in passing. But we find out that poor waitress above the knee amputation.
We knew that's where it was headed because she got sick really quick. Cut that leg off stat.
I knew that was going to happen too. And that's why I got frustrated last week when, he cuts the leg open. I'm like, I know where he's coming from. It's just what are you guys waiting for? You wanted this thing, where do you think want this thing to spread to? To her hip?
If she only ends up with an above knee amputation, she'll be doing okay because that's life-threatening.
Yep. She'll be doing great. Could you imagine that you show up with a red mark on your foot and turns out to be this?
Don't scare your listeners, Victor. Don't scare them. I know you're already scared.
I'm still fixated on this case. I don't want that to happen. I'm going to go to if I see any kind of discoloration on my skin, I'm immediately going to the doctor.
No, you're not.
To the hospital.
No, you're not. You're too stubborn for that.
That's true. I'd lose my leg and still. My toes are fine. They're just black.
I ran into Victor's orthopedist in the hallway the other day asking about how your hip was doing. I'm like, well, if we had x-ray vision, we might know.
I tried to get an appointment.
Blah, blah, blah.
That's for off microphone. Okay, question I have for you. The rest of these questions, some of them are just like comedic beats, but some of it is just stuff I didn't understand. Okay, this guy in the hallway, this new nurse practitioner, just became nurse practitioner, I guess. He's trying to alleviate the pressure here, trying to grab one of the patients, and he's concerned that he might have a clot that gets thrown to his head. And they're like, well, it's unlikely. You're on Eliquis, right? Eliquis. Mm-hmm. And then Dr. Mohan shows up and she's like, oh, no, don't worry. Don't worry. I know this guy. This is her usual style, by the way. She's like kind of a little too touchy-feely with the patients. But she says, oh, he comes in every month and we do a D-dimer. What is a D-dimer?
A D-dimer is a blood test that you can do, which if is negative, kind of rules out any clotting. Meanwhile, this patient is on full dose blood thinners, so the likelihood of him having another clot is quite low. So a D-dimer is pretty useless in this scenario, but they appear to just trying to appease the patient. And sometimes you do that. If someone is demanding something, even if it doesn't make medical sense, sometimes you do give in to the patient because it will satisfy them so that you can get them out of the ER. If you're really looking for a clot, you just need to do a venous Doppler of the legs to see if the patient has a new clot here. I don't remember what his specific complaint was. He thinks he has a clot in his lungs, or he's been treated for one. Anyway, a D-dimer is non-specific, so it doesn't necessarily rule in or rule out anything. So
I had two questions there. One was the obvious one, like what is a D-dimer? The second one was the more philosophical one, maybe, which is if you just go up to a patient and say like, hey, what procedure would you like? And they come in every month for a test that is non-diagnostic, like, isn't that horrible for our overall healthcare costs?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You have patients that come in with like a viral upper respiratory infection demanding antibiotics. And as a medical provider, you have to educate them to tell them why they don't need antibiotics. But sometimes doctors just want to move on and will just hand out a prescription for antibiotics, knowing full well that it's not going to help their viral infection. So it's not good medicine, but unfortunately, sometimes people do take shortcuts.
Next question I had for you that just popped up as I was watching this. Have you ever had a patient you needed to communicate with who via ASL or even just a foreign language? Like I think about the woman from Nepal last year who they couldn't communicate with and they had to use AI. I guess it was AI, but like a translating tool to do the translation. Yeah. Have you ever had that experience?
Yeah, I have had patients who are hearing impaired, and nowadays it's very easy to get a translator on an iPad. So you can basically FaceTime with someone who can translate sign. So you don't have to wait very long. You just have to call the number and get them on. But it depends. If the woman or the person who's doing the translating isn't immediately available, you may have to wait. Sometimes I'll call the translator line. I was on hold for like 15 minutes one day trying to find, I don't even remember what language it was, but whoever it was that was part of the service was on another call. You can get Spanish like within 30 seconds, but if it's not something that's common, you have to wait a little bit.
Yeah, I guess the translation software has gotten very good at, but that's when you're verbalizing something. I wouldn't be surprised if this already exists. There probably is now some AI tool that could actually see this woman's hand motions and do a translation of.
Yeah, we have mobile iPads that are on wheels, and you just hit like connect to translator, and then someone will come on. So it's a video interaction. Yeah,
with a FaceTime, first of all, that definitely should be available where you can push a button and there's just someone at home who, does this by the hour and they could pop up on the screen and they can do a translation in real time. So I'm surprised that they're not using technology like that, but I'm talking about like actually using AI to record her hand motions and then doing a translation of like when she's spelling things with her hand. Like at one point, she's actually spelling something with her hand, and you see this very funny. This princess, the nurse, is trying to translate. She's like, I'm a little out of my depth at this point.
Yeah, it's like when I speak my broken Spanish to someone and they're like, oh, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, hold on. Gotta get someone who's better at this.
I'm just like, gracias, hola. Debe tirar más fotos. Oh, one more thing I wanted to bring up. Just a little, not almost a comedic beat, but just a little character detail as well. I was like, what is Joy doing here with Ogilvy? Ogilvy continues to... I really like these two characters, basically, what it comes down to. And they're coming from very different places. But I'm like, why would Joy ever want this job?
Oh, and she doesn't. She says she wants to be a pathologist, which is perfect. You do not have to interact with people. You just have to interact with microbiology.
Hard pass. I love that. And Ogilvy's like, I think the reaction is great. Ogilvy's like, I was born to do this. And she like laughs out loud. And she's like, hard pass.
She's already commented that she does not want to deal with death in any way, shape, or form. So pathology has no connection to human life. Exactly. No direct connection.
No direct. Yeah. Interesting. So pathology is you never interact with patients. It's all behind the scenes. It's just analyzing like cultures and stuff.
Yeah, you're analyzing samples from biopsies and tissue samples and other things. You're looking at it under a microscope and giving your report as to what you think it is.
I could do that. Maybe that'll be my final career. I was going to say my next career, my final career.
Go back to medical school at age 50.
Why not?
Then do a residency. See you in 10 years.
I'm still a young man at that point.
Hey, it's not impossible. But you like to talk, Victor. You can't be a pathologist.
I could just podcast while I'm looking at cultures.
That would be one interesting podcast.
A different kind of culture podcast.
Good one.
And then we get to the end of the episode, and but before we get that, this guy on the motorcycle, I like all the comedy around this. Like, oh, Robbie, look, your friend on the motorcycle, another motorcycle accident. Oh, you wore your helmet. Oh, very nice. That sounds like a smart thing to do. And he's commiserating around with this guy, but this procedure where you said that this is something you do, right? You inject the...
Yeah, they were injecting some like fluorescein into the knee joint to see if it came out through the laceration to see if there was a joint connection. That is something they do. I just haven't seen that fluorescein mixture specifically. We use that in the eye, like these fluorescein strips. You put in someone's eye, and then you use a Woods lamp, which is like a UV light, to see if there's a disruption in the cornea to diagnose a corneal abrasion. So same type of thing where they inject something that's lights up under a lamp
to see if it escapes. Right. And then we have to drain it afterwards.
You can also just do this with saline. You can just inject saline into the knee and see if it comes out through the laceration. So
I guess if there might be just moisture. I mean, I'm assuming, this is me assuming, but you could probably just see the moisture. Like, since there's probably moisture there, you might have missed something. But of course, if it's fluorescent, you're going to know exactly where the source is.
True. It's a little bit more specific, but if you're taking a big syringe and injecting into the knee, you're going to see some saline come out. So
they just wanted to show cool technology. That's all it was. And yeah, and then of course we come to the end of the episode, the whole revelations about Louie, and of course that was the whole point of this episode, was kind of like humanizing these characters. And I think the two parallel storylines, this, like, all these nurses and how all the invisible work they're doing, staging everything so that this life-saving can occur, and then giving dignity to these forgotten characters.
The one thing about Louie's death, I did predict that he was going to die, and he dies of pulmonary hemorrhage. There's no foreshadowing to that before he's already like coded and been intubated. I would have liked for him to maybe have coughed up a little blood before he dies of pulmonary hemorrhage, but that's okay. There was just not a lot of preamble to that.
Well, I mean, that actually made me think of something else, which is, first of all, is I think, like, from a storytelling perspective, then that probably would be an obvious thing to do. And maybe even in the actual medical case itself, so that having that kind of, additional context is maybe more realistic. But I did like the fact that, like, here's a guy who's like, he's in liver failure, right? And this is one of the possible outcomes of that. And the fact that when Princess, I think, walks in, or one of the nurses walks in, and immediately says, like, oh no, it's Dana talking to the trainee nurse, that it's a pulmonary hemorrhage. She identifies it right away, and that basically he's going to die now.
Yeah, I mean, there's blood pouring out of his ET tube after they intubate him. So there's very clearly a very bad problem happening.
What's the thing that, like, Langdon says, can we do like CDC or something? And then Robbie's like, too late for that. What was that? I mean, I probably got the terminology wrong.
I don't know what specifically he said there. They also mentioned like he's not a candidate for ECMO, which is a way of bypassing the heart and lungs to keep someone alive. But you're right. He used some other term. I have to go back and see what that was. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was something else there. But I mean, I assume we all knew that like Louie is just, this has been a slow motion suicide for him this whole entire time anyway. We kind of suspected that anyway. And now we know the personal context maybe just drives that home.
And I was reminded of a patient that I took care of when I did trauma who was an alcoholic with liver failure, who basically died in front of me. It was very traumatic. He had been a frequent flyer for various things, and he had been seen for something minor, like knee pain. And then he was discharged. And after he was discharged, he was crossing the street from the hospital to go to the convenience store and got hit at low speed by a motor vehicle. So it came in as a trauma. And he ended up like bleeding out into his chest and dying from a very minor injury because liver failure leads to coagulopathy, which is the inability to create clot. So he had an injury that, you know, if you got hit by a 5-mile-an-hour car and had a bruise to your lung, you're not going to die. But this guy actually bled out into his chest. So stop drinking, everybody.
Yeah, it's probably the best rule of thumb. Speaking of drinking, we do need to talk about Drops of God, which you haven't finished watching. So I just want to let the audience know that we'll discuss this week's episode and next week's episode in the next conversation. But I'll just let you know, this episode's called Brothers and Sisters. And of course, we have the parallel stories of this brother and sister. And then, of course, this toxic relationship between this Georgian brother and sister. And this is maybe the best episode of the season, by the way. So it's really, there's some interesting, almost like primal imagery here about Issei confronting his fear of the dark. And once again, like bringing somebody into the fold, like teaching Victor, the brother, this kind of toxic brother, about the joys of wine because he's trying to impress somebody so that he can get a casino built. And he hates wine because of this family history he has, but then they're trying to teach him so that he can impress this person. And then he brings them along and he starts to be like, oh, this can help me get what I want. So then I'm kind of interested in this, but it looks like they might be able to. It's funny. He calls them out. He goes like, oh, so you are brother and sister? He finds this out, by the way. He didn't know this. Like, so what are you trying to do? Like some therapy on us? They're like, what's your agenda? And they're like, yeah, kind of. And he's just like, who are you people? Like trying to like fix every brother and sister relationship in the world. And they're like, because you're having a nice, happy family. I'm going to have that too. And they're like, actually, it was pretty rough. And our dad sucks. And they're like, oh, that kind of sounds like my dad too. So it actually looks like they are going to find common ground with these brother and sister. And yeah, I'm liking this. But I'm very curious. It feels like this part of the story, it's like, you know, what was that old Highway to Heaven where the angel goes and solves people's problems? I'm like, I have a feeling that this show is going to have to wrap up this season because I'm like, is that what's going to happen next season? They're like, they travel around the world saving other wineries from and bad toxic family relationships. Anyway, wait till you watch and then tell me what you think. I'm also wondering if they're trying to set up a romantic relationship between this guy and Camille, which is, no. If that's the case, that I think it's a bad choice considering we just have the whole Tomas situation still going on.
I have only watched 15 minutes of this episode and I don't like that character at all. So Camille better not go that direction.
Well, he changed. I mean, this is his episode here to change. It's also the fact that she's just like, I hate that guy. And then she kind of starts warming up to him by the end of the episode. I'm like, uh-oh, what is that? There's that whole hate to attraction.
Well, let me watch it before we talk anymore. We can talk about it next week.
We will. We'll talk more about this one and next week as well. So yeah, we will continue to watch that. And after next week, we only have 2 more episodes. So like I said, I has a feeling like, you know, if they do indeed resolve the brother-sister conflict in the next episode, it looks like they're ready to wrap up this whole entire show. And I am curious that maybe this isn't the type of show, as much as I like just the beautiful imagery and stuff. Maybe this isn't a show that doesn't need a 3rd season. Or maybe even a 2nd one.
I was going to say, it wrapped up quite nicely after the 1st season. I do like this season, not quite as much as the 1st.
Yeah, exactly. And I do like the fact that, you know, they kind of have like this fairy tale ending for season 1. And they're like, well, things are more complicated, which I do appreciate. But I don't know if we can just keep dragging that on indefinitely. We'll see, though. We'll see how it all wraps up. We're only a few episodes away. As far as the Pitt, though, we are a long way to go.
No, we're only halfway through.
On the podcast, we're still talking about industry. I think there's 3 episodes left of that. Things are accelerating. Great reveal this past week about the actual finances of this company, which I won't spoil here, of course. And of course, we're rewatching Christopher Nolan's films. We've watched the first 2 films, and then we'll slot this in. There's going to be a lot of premieres coming towards the end of February, so we'll look for other dead spots on the calendar to continue that rewatch. But we've covered Following, which most people have not seen, a very, very tiny film, $6,000 it may cost to produce that, but of course put him on the map. And then, of course, Memento, which we just did this week, which was a huge breakthrough for him. Anyway, thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Kim. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you. Thank you for the flowers.
No problem. My pleasure. And we'll talk to you. I'm actually working on Monday, but everybody else, if you have off on Monday, enjoy your day off as well. And that industry episode will be out on Monday. And talk to you soon.
Bye.